Hey adventurers, so today's going to be it's a sequel essentially to a video that I made earlier. Several weeks, months ago at this point, I made a video that was something about easy entry series. And these were series that had a low barrier to entry. They were ones that you could really easily just start reading and read them without really needing to know the genre, without really needing much of anything, much of like a prior experience or anything like that, or that were just for some reason worked well as the first book worked well as a standalone or something like that, or were just easy to for whatever reason were easy to get into. They had a low barrier of entry. And so I made that first list, and that was a very fun video for me, and it was very fulfilling video for me to make. And when I wrote that list, I had a whole bunch of other series that were already coming to mind. And so what I ended up doing is I kind of ended up grouping these videos in or these series lists of series into a couple different groups. And so this next group that I have is I don't know how to, it's kind of more like a low fantasy type genre series, and they're not all low fantasy, but they're that I don't want to say lesser style, because it's not lesser, but it's a lower style in terms of it's not epic fantasy. It might be sci-fi, it might be something else, but it's usually something that is a lot easier to just digest than that epic fantasy, which I love. I do love the epic fantasy and stuff like that. But so that's kind of what my goal with this one is they're a little bit more broad in terms of what I'm looking for, but it's still kind of that same idea. And so that we don't get too long on this video, I'm going to jump right in here. And the first one that I have on this list is the Area X series by Jeff Vandermeer. So the first book is Annihilation. Then there's another 3 books in this series. I DNF'd the series I DNF'd book 4 of the series, very close, about 70% into the series, into the book or something like that. However, book 1 is fantastic. I loved book 1, but it's also a very short book, and that makes it a very easy entry series, very easy to get into, low barrier to entry, because of the fact that it's so short. It's not much of a time constraint to pick it up and read it, and it's a very, very intriguing book. It's very atmospheric, very creepy. It's I don't know what it is, but it's like there's some horror elements to it for sure, sci-fi elements for sure. Basically, Area X is this area that has been taken over by something, and there's this barrier to get into this Area X, and there's one way in, one door type thing, portal to get into the area, and within it things are very different. It seems as if there's been something causing evolution to advance very quickly in that area, and so things are different. The perception of reality is slightly warped and things like that. And just the more that you explore it, the more fascinating it becomes. And I don't want to talk about really anything that's in the book, because it's just so fascinating. It's one that you have to experience for yourself to understand, and the less you know about it, the better. But at that same time, it is so fascinating. It's so atmospheric. And that first book, I just adored that first book. It was one of my favorite books that I read the year that I read it. Unfortunately, I don't feel like the rest of the series held up quite as good as book 1. But with that, still, it was so good. That first book was so good. And you could read that first book as a standalone. You don't need the other books. It's a very good book in and of itself, and it's short, which helps a lot too. All right, let's continue on. The next one I have on the list is The Children of the Consortium series by Kathy McCrum. The first book is a recorder. Really, why this series is on this list is because I want to show the cover off again. All the covers in this series are very, very beautiful. Recorder is book 1, book 2 is titled Aberration, and then book 3 is Guardian, and they're just very, very vivid, very beautiful covers like this. But they're sci-fi, so they're also Christian fiction. Again, this is one where you can sit down and read the first book, and it's very easy to read. It's not hard to get into. It's not super hard. It's not super hard sci-fi. There are some. It's a little bit more hard sci-fi in some aspects, but it's also just very much. It feels like a spaceship. as in like the things are familiar. The things that you are seeing, they're not something that is super complicated to understand. The concepts are not that hard to understand, but they're, like most sci-fi, there are some horror aspects to it. Very, very light horror, not horrible, but there is some horror elements. There's some just the generic sci-fi elements that go into it. But I found this to be a book that, well, for one, I related to the main character in ways that I don't normally see myself relating to characters, and that was really interesting to see, and so that drew me to it and attached me to it. I haven't yet read book 3, but there's also the way that the author creates the events that goes on in the story are very interesting, because there's a lot of a mystery aspect to it, which is also fairly common with sci-fi, I feel like. But there's like some mystery aspects, some horror aspects, there is some. It's not preachy. Like, we're not in a place where people are preaching about God and stuff like that. But you can clearly see that the author's influences on certain aspects. But even with that, I just felt like the story was really enjoyable in and of itself. Really, it's just got some interesting concepts that I really appreciated seeing, and some discussions on essentially free will that were interesting that I appreciated seeing as well. But even with that, I do feel like even though this is much more of like a series where you kind of do need to read all 3 of the books, even though I haven't read book 3 yet, I do want to. I do feel like this is a fairly easy series to get into. It's a low barrier to entry. You can just read this first one, see what you feel from there, and then it ends in a good enough spot where you could set it down and not read the next ones if you don't want to. So that's kind of what I thought of this one and why it's on here as well, and because I like showing off the cover. This next series is probably not too terribly surprising that it's on a list like this, and on an easy entry series list, and that is the Chronicles of Narnia. And I pulled out 2 books here because really there's 2 great starting points for the series. You can start with The Magician's Nephew, which is chronological book 1, or you can start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is release order book 1. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was the first book written. And I feel like they're both great starting points. I personally, The Magician's Nephew, I enjoy in some ways, in a lot of ways, slightly more than The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but they're both very, very good stories. And the other thing is they're very short. They're not long books, and they read very easily. They read very quickly, and they are, a lot of people classify them as children's literature. And so it's kind of one of those ones where it's not hard for adults to read a children's literature book. But there's a lot of deep themes in them. There's everybody knows about the Christian allegory and imagery that's going on with these stories, and that's absolutely a part of it. I'm not trying to overshadow that or hide that or anything at all. That is absolutely a part of the series. But they're also, you can just read the stories for the stories that they are, and they're fun stories. And having 2 spots that you could start at, both of which are good starting points, makes it a lot easier to start reading the series for sure. Plus the short books, all 7 of the books are fairly short, and yes, it is a series. Yes, it is a 7-book series, which is fairly long, but even with that, it's not a huge commitment to read them because there are fairly short books. And again, 2 starting points, which really helps. Easy stories to read, which really helps. Just a lot of great reasons why this could be a easy entry series like this. Next one I have is Calculated by Nova McBee. This is one that I've talked about quite a bit on the channel, and this is one where, okay, so this is things like The Count of Monte Cristo heavily influenced this book, as well as, again, it's Christian fiction. This is sci-fi. This is much lower sci-fi with, it's kind of a revenge story. It's kind of a Count of Monte Cristo, like I mentioned, which is where it gets that revenge aspects. It's kind of, I guess, you can kind of mix like Count of Monte Cristo and Mission Impossible, and that's kind of what you're getting with this story. And it works. It's a combination that works surprisingly well. It's easy to read, very interesting. It's not a magic system, but it's very interesting way of viewing the world. Let's say it that way. A very interesting way of viewing the world from our main character that is really well executed. And honestly, this world as a whole is the first book. I enjoyed it. it wasn't a favorite book of all time, but the world that was being explored and created in this book, I was like, okay, I want to read more in this world. I think that the author could capitalize on the great things that were in this book and make a better second book. And she wrote the second book. I do like the second book as well. It ended up being about the same as Calculated for me in that I liked it, but there was some enough things about it that I didn't like. She almost wrote a completely different type of story for book two. And so there were some things that were really strong about book two and some things that I felt didn't work for me as well in book two. But then in book three, she took the things that from book two that worked really well and the things from book three that worked really, or from book one that worked really well, and combined them. And so book three is just like one of my favorite books that I'd read in a very long time. It's a great book in the series. We're still waiting on book four. That is a problem. But overall, I really enjoyed this series as a whole. But this book, it reads really quickly. It's very interesting. The low sci-fi or soft sci-fi, I guess, if you want to call it that, with some hard sci-fi ideas, some very few hard sci-fi ideas, but the way of viewing the world that's in this is fascinating. It's very mathematical. I mean, obviously it's titled Calculated. There's a lot of math that goes into it, and it's a well-told story. It is YA, but it's just a really well-told story, especially as you continue through the series. But this first book ends in a good spot where you could, if you want to continue, it's a great series to continue. But again, it's one of those ones where you could read the first book and decide, okay, I think I'm okay. I don't need to read more. For me, it was, okay, I'm okay. I don't need to read more, but I would like to see what else the author can do with this world. And so that's why I continued reading, and I'm glad that I did, because I enjoyed book one, I enjoyed book two, but then I really enjoyed book three. Then I have Phased by Tori Tekken. So this is an interesting one in that if this was a really long series, I probably wouldn't include this on the list. But it's not. It's a duology. And that makes it really easy to get into. But it's also I hesitate to call it YA because it's not really YA. It deals with some very heavy subject matters, and thematically it's very, very heavy. And it's very interesting the way that Tekken writes the story and tells the story. I feel like it works really well. Phased it's a urban fantasy. It's kind of an urban fantasy type story where we're set in our modern day world, and there's these fantasy elements that are invading the magical world. This is not my favorite book of all time. This isn't even my favorite book that I've read by Tori Tekken. That would be The Bloodstones, which was my favorite book of last year. But this one was really good, and the fact that it is a duology means that you can read book one, and then there's book two, and that's it. And it's not a huge series that you have to try and dive into and get into. I think if this was a longer series, it would be harder for me to read, because I think that I would get bogged down with the subject matter. It would be, and yes, the characters are vampire, or the characters are werewolves, but the subject matter that we're dealing with is so powerful and so hard to read at times that would, I feel like the story could get away from you, and you could just end up diving too much into that subject matter without being able to tell a story anymore. And I feel like containing the story, the Phase duology, into 2 books is going to really benefit this story as a whole. Book 2 is not out yet, but it will be coming at some point. Anyways, another one that fairly short, fairly quick read, very enjoyable read, but it's also got some heavy subject matter, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Not, like I mentioned, not my favorite book of all time, but it's one that I was very pleasantly surprised by, especially since it's a genre that I don't tend to gravitate towards very much. Next on the list is the Locke Institute trilogy by A.R. Witham. So this is a series, it's basically a Prison Break series. We have our character who is a pirate scoundrel who gets trapped who gets imprisoned on an island, essentially, with a whole bunch of other inmates and stuff like that. And basically it's their attempts to survive and escape if possible. And it's very clever, it's very quick, very witty, very fun, with a lot of horror elements and darkness to it as well. And the combination that Witham is able to do in this series is just fantastic. It's a trilogy, which makes it really easy to get into. The books read very, very quickly. The one thing that I would say about this is I would recommend reading. Apparently people have done it the other way, and I've heard that it works just fine. But I would recommend reading The Legend of Blackjack first, as it takes place chronologically before the Locke Institute trilogy, at least in this world. And so, yes, it was also released before the Locke Institute trilogy. But The Legend of Blackjack is a standalone. And then the Locke Institute trilogy, there are some tie-ins to The Legend of Blackjack, but it's its own story as well. So you don't have to read Blackjack to read Locke Institute. I would recommend it because I feel like it's going to increase your understanding of the world, which then will increase your enjoyability of the book. But it's not necessary. And either way, this series is just, I don't read audio, or I don't read ebooks very much. Both of the first two books in this trilogy I read on ebooks, and the third book hasn't come out yet. So I know that I am going to love this series because, well, I already did, but also I read them very quickly for me, especially on ebook, and was just like, I was so excited for these books that I was like, I don't even care. I'm not going to wait for the real books to come out. I just want to read these books right now because I love them. I love The Legend of Blackjack so much, and then I've loved these two books in the Locke Institute trilogy just as much. They're just absolutely fantastic, and A.R. Witham is a very, very talented storyteller. Yeah, they're easy entry. It's an easy book easy series to get into. I would recommend starting with Legend of Blackjack, so that kind of makes it a little bit of a higher barrier to entry, but it's not necessary. You can absolutely start with book one, which is The Crimes of Rooker Flynn, I believe. Yes, The Crimes of Rooker Flynn is book one in the Locke Institute trilogy, and very, very much enjoyable. You're meeting this character, you're seeing who he is, why he is the way that he is. You're seeing as he tries to create something that can help him to survive, and the way the failures and the successes that come along with that fascinating world. There's a villain that is like Dolores Umbridge from the Harry Potter series, where you just hate her. She's just the worst. The villain is just the worst in this series, and it's a great villain because of that. Yeah, I very, very much enjoyed these series for sure. Very fast paced, very easy to get into. Very, very quick reads as well, not terribly long. They're good length for a fantasy book. Yeah, very easy entry in a lot of ways, even with the extra little barrier with Legend of Blackjack. The next series I have on here is the Giver series, or the Giver Quartet, it's a quartet, so there's 4 books in this series. The first book is The Giver, and really The Giver and Gathering Blue, which are books 1 and 2 in this quartet, I love both of those books. The Giver especially has had a huge impact on me, and then Gathering Blue, I just loved the story that was being told in Gathering Blue. But then, okay, so The Giver, it's a short dystopian, YA dystopian novel, and so again, short. It's very easy to get into. It's a little bit more YA, which means that it's easy to read. It tends to be a little bit easier to read, of which help with the low barrier to entry. But it's also just a very fascinating story. It's a haunting look at society and at what could happen with a government dystopian, with a dystopian government type thing, which is that's one of the things that dystopian novels do so well, is look at what the world could be very easily. And this one has a little bit more of like a fantasy element, a magical element to it than just pure sci-fi. If you just read The Giver, I read The Giver 3 times before I continued on into the series, and it never felt like fantasy to me. It felt like sci-fi until I got to Messenger, which is book 3, which made me recontextualize the whole series. But The Giver and Gathering Blue just felt like a dystopian sci-fi series, and it worked really well for me. But yes, The Giver, very easy to read, very quick read. It's short again, like I like to mention, like I like to include on these lists. The first book's very short and very easy to get into. Also, the first book works wonderful as a standalone. You don't need to read any more in the series after the first book. The first book is very self-contained in and of itself, and it's a wonderful story. A little bit haunting, a little bit disturbing, but it's also wonderful, and it's one of the most impactful books that I have ever read on me as a person. So we've got another fun one here. This is the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries by Patricia Meredith. Book 1 is Butcher, Baker, Candlestick Taker. And so this is it's a mystery series, as is in the title, Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries. So it's a mystery series. There are currently 3 books out in the series, but these are very fun. If you like mysteries, these are fantastic. In fact, I have enjoyed these more than a lot of the other westerns that I've read, or mysteries that I've read. Especially, like, I haven't really enjoyed the Agatha Christie books that I have read, whereas these ones, it's just been fantastic. I loved both book 1 and 2. I haven't read book 3 yet, but I have loved these, and the way that Meredith constructs the story is just fantastic. But again, it's a fairly short read. It's a mystery book, so it's fast-paced. It's go, go, go until you get to the end. But the thing that really resonates with this for me is the characters, especially Archie. He's just one of he's like a breath of fresh air type character, and he's just so enjoyable to read. And just the way that Meredith sets this book in a historical period, weaves in the historical events that are going on and stuff like that, but then tells this very fun story, very good story. It is a murder mystery. It's dark. There's some creepiness to it, but it's also it's like a cozy mystery in a lot of ways as well. And it's just so good. I've really, really loved reading these books by Patricia Meredith. She's got some other books. One of them is, she's got 2 books in a Christmas mystery. It's like a mystery set around Christmas time, because the snowman wakes up for the 12 days of Christmas. And it's just so, the concept is really interesting, but then she tells this fun fantasy mystery story at the same time, and so she's got other works as well. These ones especially are fantastic stories in and of themselves. It's very much a mystery series. But again, because it's a mystery series, you can read the first book. The second book has a lot of ties to book 1, and it is a series in that way. But the first book is very easy to read as a standalone and just enjoy. Oh, this was a fun mystery story. And then if you want to read more, absolutely continue on reading more. But this first book, so good. I really enjoyed the second book as well, but this first book absolutely works as the first book in a series. It's very easy to get into, very easy to read, very easy to understand what's going on. Follow the characters, follow the storyline, follow the events that are transpiring. It's very easy to follow. And because of all of that, it just makes, and the not, what's this, 333 pages with the acknowledgments. And so it's a fairly short, it's a decent sized book for a mystery, but it's not that long, especially for people who are used to reading big series or big fantasy or anything like that. It's not that much of a commitment, and it's just so well told. The next one I have is the Redwall series by Brian Jakes. So this is a 22 book epic fantasy series about animals. So this is one that's going to have a higher barrier to entry for a lot of people, in the fact that it's anthropomorphic fantasy, which means animals given human characteristics. That being said, if you're not bothered by that, or you can get past that, the storytelling in these is so fun. I have just loved these stories my entire life, and sometimes stories that you loved as a kid, you love them as an adult because of nostalgia. These ones I have, as I've continued reading them throughout the years, I have been able to look at them objectively and see that they are just objectively good stories. They're yes, I have nostalgia tied to them, but I can also read the books that I hadn't read as a child in the series and say, this was a good book. And I can read the ones that I didn't like as a kid or didn't like as much as a kid, and read them again now and say, this was so good. The way that he constructed the story, the way that he was doing what he was doing was so good. And so just because it's a middle grade series with a lot of nostalgia tied to it for me, doesn't mean that it's not good stories. But they also read very quickly. They're very easy to follow. The plots are very, very easy to follow. You don't really get confused with them. You can remember the events that are going on pretty easily. But then the other thing about them that I particularly love, and that I feel like particularly makes it a fantastic series for this easy entry series is you can start at might near any book in the series. There are a few that are direct sequels. Matameo is a direct sequel to Redwall, but beyond that, there's very few that have direct sequels. There is kind of like a trilogy in Martin the Warrior, Mossflower, and The Legend of Luke. The organization of those, The Legend of Luke, can either go at the beginning or the end. And so there is kind of like a trilogy within that, is in that specific series. And you will find books that are very clearly follow one chronologically, one book or the other. But for the most part, you with those few exceptions of essentially Matameo, you essentially need to read Matameo after you read Redwall. Other than that, you can pretty much read any of the other books whenever you want to. So Redwall is the first book that was written in the series, and it's a great starting point. And then the second book that was written in the series is Mossflower, which then later on down the road, Jakes wrote Martin the Warrior, which is set before Mossflower. And so even that one, like, you don't need that direct chronology in order to understand the stories that are being told. You can absolutely read Mossflower before you read Martin the Warrior. So just things like that make it very, very enjoyable, make it very easy to get into. They're not terribly long. The longest of them is around 400 pages. Most of them are around is around like 450 pages. Most of them are around the 350 mark, and they are middle grade, but they are not afraid to go dark in the places that it is warranted, in terms of, okay, so because they're animals, you can get away with a lot more violence in a middle grade book than you would if they were humans. And Jakes utilizes that very well. It gets brutal, but it is so effective with the storytelling that's going on. Yeah, just another great series that is just all around low barrier to entry because there's so many starting points. You can pick up any book in the series with the exception of probably Matameo, and even that one wouldn't be horrible. It would just, the other ones would be better. So with the exception of Matameo, basically, you can start anywhere in the series and you'll be fine. You'll understand what's going on. Yeah, so that's another one that I have. Plus, it's one of my favorite series of all time. And then the last series that I have for low barrier to entry is The Sackets by Louis L'Amour. So the first book in the series is Sackett's Land. This is another one that's low barrier to entry because they're Western novellas. They're Western novels. Louis L'Amour is a very, very good author very good at writing short, quick, fast-paced books. He's known for his Westerns. Sackett's Land actually takes place before the Western era starts and stuff like that. And so it's in Queen Bess's England. So I don't know what the year is off the top of my head. Around 1600. Sackett's Land is set around 1600. And so we've got a good, like, this is set far enough in the past that it's not Western anymore. But the way that the story's told, and then this series, the Sacketts chronicles. This series chronicles the Sackett family from the 1600s to the end of the 1800s, and more or less around that time, and is able to tell this family saga through Western America and the organization of America, founding of America, and stuff like that, through to the late 1800s. And it just tells this epic saga of this family and their interactions with the world. A lot of Western stories, but a lot of the books in this series are, this one's 185, I believe, pages. Yeah, 185 pages for this story. And so you can, like, pick it up and read it, and it'll read very quickly, and it's a fun story. You don't technically have to start with book one. I would recommend it because you'll get the history of these characters and who they are. But it's just a very, very easy series to enter because this first book is very easy to sit down and read. And then the rest of the series as well is very easy to sit down and read. They're all standalones, even though they are part of the series. There are a couple that have direct sequels or characters that are the children of the previous generation in the previous book or something like that. But for the most part, you can just read the individual books in the series as individual standalones with the tie-ins, and the more that you've read of the books beforehand, the more of the tie-ins you'll understand and stuff like that. So anyways, that's the last one that I wanted to do. I wanted to throw it in here because I love the Western genre, and I don't read enough of it, but I wanted to make sure that I throw this one out because it's fantastic. So that is my list for part 2 of Easy Entry series. I don't know. This is kind of like a little bit of a lighter. How do you describe it? It's not so epic. It's not so dense of a genre list. I feel like I did fairly good with my first list, where it was a pretty not the epicest of epic fantasy, but it was just a lot of fairly basic, easy entry. Obviously easy entry, that's why I do it. But a lot of books where you really have that standalone power with the first book and stuff like that. Anyways, I will stop this because I know that it's getting along, and I don't want to take up any more time with this for myself or for you guys. So thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.